Do you believe a creature of legend could keep a promise better than a human? One foggy morning, deep in the outskirts of Oklahoma's Ouachita National Forest, an old man living alone opened his door to find something impossible. A Bigfoot, silent, towering, cradling a feverish teenage girl in its arms. The shocking truth: there's a secret tribe of Bigfoot that not only exists, but protects humans like family. They left fish, built fires, and when the girl was dying, they didn't turn to myths. They turned to a man who once saved one of their own. A man they believed still kept his word. That man was Harlan Booth, 67, a recluse with a forgotten past, and the only human ever trusted by the Bigfoot. In this video, you'll uncover why the Bigfoot tribe broke silence to intervene in a human life, how Harlan defended both his world and theirs without violence, and the quiet act of compassion that made even a hunter walk away in shame. This isn't fiction. Nell Rowan, 15, had been living off scraps until the Bigfoot sheltered her in a forest cabin. When her health failed, they carried her to the only human they trusted. And through Harlan, they may have saved both her and themselves from fear-driven violence. If you skip this story, you'll miss the one moment a legendary creature stepped forward not to attack, but to ask for help. They still watch, quiet, gentle, and maybe more human than we are. Dawn barely cracked through the fog, and the ridgeline above Heavener blurred like a memory. The pine tops vanished into low cloud, and the cold stuck to the air like wet wool. It was the kind of morning that sat heavy on a man's chest before he'd even had his coffee. Harlan Booth, 67, moved slow down the back steps of the cabin, boots landing on each plank with a creak that always sounded louder when no one else was around to hear it. He carried a worn lantern in one hand and a rusted feed bucket in the other, the kind that had seen more winters than most men in the county. The frost hadn't fully let go of the ground, and each step toward the horse she'd sent a dull thud up through the dirt. A squirrel scrambled somewhere past the fence line. His mule, Daisy, let out a low, uneasy bray, eyes darting toward the tree line. That's what stopped him first. Not the wind, not the cold, not even the tightness in his own knees, but the way Daisy suddenly froze. He followed her stare, then he felt it. A tremor in the soil, not strong, not constant, just enough to make the dust on the feed bin shift like breath on a mirror. He held still. Something large was moving through the woods, not charging, not crashing, just wait. Measured, intentional. There, between the thick-barked oaks, a figure came into focus. Not just large, immense, not stomping, walking, upright, like a man, but not. Arms longer than they ought to be. Shoulders that brushed past trees without flinching. And in those arms, a smaller shape curled like a dropped rag doll. Legs limp, hair damp, head lolling forward. Harlan didn't move. His fingers tightened on the lantern's handle. The shape stepped clear of the trees, and light caught the face. It wasn't the first time Harlan had seen one. He saw the eyes first. Deep-set, alert, cautious but not wild. The nose was straight, the brow thick like carved rock. The mouth held closed in restraint, not confusion. No snarling, no teeth. Then the arms shifted, and the bundle in them groaned. A girl, pale, burnt with fever. He couldn't guess her age through the dirt and sweat, but he could see the chapped lips and hollow cheeks. The girl's wrist slipped loose, and in that moment, the creature turned slightly to catch her. That was when Harlan saw the scar. It twisted along the forearm, curved like a hook, not fresh, not shallow, and he knew that scar. Years ago, he'd found a young one in a spring trap near the creek bed. Barely upright, breathing fast, teeth grit in silence. He remembered the blood on the leaves, the way it had raised no cry even as he'd freed it. He'd used a leather strap to make a splint, bound it tight with trembling hands and no words. That had been a long time back. Now that same leather, worn smooth and dark, hung from the creature's wrist like a memory. It stepped closer to the porch, but stopped at the first creak of the bottom stair. The boards had always been touchy. The creature looked up, eyes locking with Harlan's, and for a long moment, nothing moved. No birds, no breeze, only breath. The girl shifted again, a weak groan slipping from her throat. That was when the creature knelt. Not suddenly, carefully. It laid the girl down on the doormat, wrapped in a thin coat too small for this kind of cold. The lantern flickered. The frost held its breath. Then, slowly, the creature sat back on its heels. Just enough distance to show it meant no harm. Just enough space to say something in silence. A moment passed, and the front door hinges gave a whisper as Harlan opened it. His shotgun was in one hand, but low. Not pointed, not shaking, just there. Another second. Then he lowered it all the way, set it gently against the wall. He bent over the girl, eyes never fully leaving the woods. Her forehead burned beneath his palm. Her pulse was weak, but steady. Sweat had soaked through the collar of her shirt. He scooped her up without a word. She was lighter than he expected. Young, maybe 15. Behind him, the boards creaked again. Not from his weight, but something stepping back. He glanced once more over his shoulder. 2 more shapes lingered in the mist beneath the trees. Taller than the first. Older, maybe. Watching, waiting. One of them shifted its stance, but didn't come forward. He didn't wait. He stepped back into the house, shut the door, bolted it with quiet hands. Inside, the silence wrapped around him again. The air smelled of old pine and lamp oil. He laid the girl down on the cot beside the wood stove, covered her with the thickest wool blanket he owned. The fire hissed. The room dimmed. He walked to the cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. There, beside a tin of fishing lures and a folded cloth bag, lay the old leather strap. He ran a finger along the edge, tracing the wear. It wasn't just a piece of hide anymore. It was a mark, a thread that ran between now and then. He placed it on top of the dresser, beside the kerosene lamp. Outside, the porch groaned once more. Then silence. The wind picked up slightly. Somewhere near the back of the property, a single horse huffed in its stall. A night bird called low and long. Inside the house, Harlan sat beside the girl and placed a damp cloth across her forehead. Her body twitched, restless in fever. She whispered something, lips barely parting. A word he couldn't make out. Then another, clearer. Don't go by the creek. He didn't answer. Just pressed the cloth down gently, wiped the sweat from her temple. He turned the lamp lower and let the dark settle back in. Then he stood, walked to the door once more, cracked it just enough to see the front porch. Empty, only the faint outline of a footprint remained in the frost. Deeper than any human could leave. Wide, flat, toes splayed. As he turned to close the door, he spotted something else. 3 shallow grooves etched into the wood of the porch beam, just above eye level. Not random, not wild, intentional. He shut the door, latched it, and leaned his back against it for a long while. The fire popped softly behind him. This wasn't the first time he'd been left with a burden he didn't ask for, but it was the first time something, had trusted him enough to leave that burden on his porch without fear. He looked again at the girl. Her breathing was uneven but steady. The blanket moved with each rise of her chest. The night outside deepened. No more footsteps, no more signs. Just the long stillness of a cold that hadn't broken yet. And beneath it all, something had shifted. Not just in the forest, not just in the floorboards, but in Harlan Booth. And he didn't know what would come next. Only that this time, he wouldn't run from it. Not again. The thermometer on the windowsill clicked once, a tiny sound, but loud in a house where silence hung like smoke after a fire. Harlan Booth turned toward it as if it had spoken, his eyes catching the mercury line near the top, too high. The room wasn't warm, but the girl lying under the wool blanket burned with fever. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls, the kind that made a man lean close to check the ribs for movement. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just drifted near the wood stove, waking every time she shifted or whimpered in her sleep. Her face was blotchy and pale beneath the sweat. Her lips dry, cracked at the edges. He'd tried water in spoonfuls, but she barely swallowed. Her skin radiated heat, and when he touched her arm, he felt the thrum of something spiraling too fast. He stood up slowly, bones protesting, back stiff from sleeping in the old rocker. He poured a bit of water into the kettle and set it on the stove. The fire was low, just embers really, so he grabbed a split log from the pile and nudged it in. Flames licked up the side. He closed the grate, then reached for the small tin he hadn't touched in years. It was tucked behind a row of old seed packets and a broken radio, up in the cabinet above the sink. His hands knew it by weight before his eyes registered it. Gray-green metal, rusted at the hinge, dented on one corner. He set it down and opened the lid. Inside, bundles of dried herbs wrapped in wax paper. Labels faded, some smudged beyond reading. He pulled two he could still name, wild mint and feverfew, and dropped them into a chipped mug. The kettle hissed behind him. As the water boiled, he filled a bowl in the basin and dipped in a cloth, then returned to the girl. She hadn't moved. Her name wasn't one he knew yet, but something about her presence in this cabin already felt older than a day. He wrung out the cloth, laid it across her forehead. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. He moved the cloth gently along her cheeks, then her arms. The sweat was thick, bitter-smelling. He changed the water, did it again. In the corner, the kettle popped softly as it settled from the boil. He paused, let the steam soak into the space. The shadows on the walls danced low and slow. A photo frame on the far shelf caught the light, the only one turned face down. He didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to the dresser, reached for the old leather strap still sitting where he'd placed it the night before, ran his fingers along the worn edge, folded it once, then set it down again. Outside, something shifted on the porch, a weight pressing down on old boards. He didn't go to the window, just stood where he was and listened. The rain had come sometime before dawn. Light at first, now steady. Not pounding, just a whispering presence outside the walls. He walked to the door and opened it slow, just enough. There, in the mist, was the young one again. Same frame, same silent weight. Standing under the eave, just out of the rain. Shoulders soaked, fur matted. Its head bowed slightly, not in fear, more like waiting. Or remembering. It didn't come forward, didn't make a sound, just stood there. Harlan didn't speak either. He glanced at the steam drifting from the mug on the table, then at the girl. She shifted. Mouth opened, a few ragged words spilling out. "Fish, on the flat stone." Her lips barely moved. Don't go by the creek. They're there." Harlan turned to look at her. "They're there." The whisper was cracked and full of sleep, but it landed in the room like a warning carved into bark. He leaned close and brushed her hair back. "You're safe," he said, though it felt like a promise he hadn't earned. Then he stepped back toward the table, picked up the leather strap, and held it in both hands. "I won't betray this," he said quietly to the room. Or maybe to the creature outside, maybe to something older than both. He set the strap down again, not tucked away this time, right on top of the dresser, in the open, like a banner. The rain shifted, hitting the porch in angled waves. He closed the door. Later, when she stirred again, he helped her sip from the mug. Not much, but enough. Enough to wet her mouth and draw a small sigh from her throat. He sat beside her again, cloth in one hand, rubbing the sweat from her neck, her wrists, folding her sleeves to cool her arms. He remembered this. Not the girl, not the sickness, but the feeling of it, the doing of it. Hands working without asking permission. The hush of a room that required gentleness. He hadn't thought that part of him still worked. His mind drifted to the memory he didn't let surface often, the first time, years back. The trap, the blood, the way the young one had stared up at him, not begging, not fighting, just watching, as if measuring, judging whether to allow him close, whether pain was the only thing men knew how to give. He had cut the snare, pulled it free, fast, bound the arm, awkwardly. The leather strap tied wrong the first time, then fixed. The creature hadn't flinched, hadn't run, and now it had brought a girl to his door. That morning, he boiled water 3 more times, changed cloths, fed the stove, listened to the shifting weight outside. The young one never moved from the porch, just stood there, letting the rain slick down its shoulders, watching the trees, watching the house. As the day stretched thin, the clouds didn't break. The forest remained cloaked, but the air inside the cabin shifted, little by little, from panic to focus, from cold to effort. That night, as the wind picked up again and the windows rattled once or twice, he stepped outside one more time. The porch was empty, but in the dirt below the step, right at the edge of where the rain had turned soil to sludge, another footprint had appeared, larger than the others, deeper. Not the young one. Something else had come, had stood close enough to see inside, then gone. He didn't sleep much that night either. But when he did, it was with the door latched, the fire low, the leather strap still visible, and the girl's breathing steady. No more muttering, no more jerks or whimpers, just sleep. And outside, in the mud beneath the pines, the forest marked their presence. Not in words, not in symbols, just in impressions. Silent, heavy, real. By morning, even the fog seemed quieter. But something had changed in the earth around the house. And deep down, Harlan Booth knew. Whatever boundary used to separate him from the shadows out there, it had thinned. Maybe just for now, maybe forever. The bar in Heavener sat off the main road like a bad decision waiting to happen. Its roof line sagging under the weight of smoke-stained years and its sign flickering through the fog like a tired eye. Inside, the walls sweated beer and old songs. A pool table leaned to one side. Someone had taped a $1 bill to the wall near the jukebox, and no one remembered why. 2 men hunched near the end of the bar, elbows planted, laughing too loud for the size of the room. One of them, stocky Dale with the oil-stained cap and a limp in his left knee, jabbed his finger at the boot print on his pant leg and said, "Swear on my mother's Bible, it was that wide, bigger than any bear I've seen, and I've seen damn near all of 'em." The other, Ray Carter, younger by 10 years and twice as eager to chase ghosts, leaned in with eyes too bright for his own good. "Where'd you see it?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his hand tapped the glass of his beer like a Morse code he hadn't noticed. Dale grinned, a toothpick shifting in his cheek. "Back ridge near Booth's place. Some kind of track cut clean into the mud, big and fresh. You know he's always been a bit off since his wife passed. Maybe he's hiding something out there." Ray's eyes narrowed, a smirk tugging at his lip. "Think we ought to pay him a little visit?" They didn't laugh loud this time, just nodded. By the time dusk rolled over the town like a worn-out curtain, the two were already checking batteries in their old VHS camcorder. Ray slapped a fresh tape in, wiped the lens with his sleeve, while Dale double-checked the beam on the flashlight. They told no one. Drove the pickup slow, windows down, letting the chill in like an unspoken dare. The deeper they went into the forest road, the less they talked. Trees arched overhead, black veins against a navy sky. Near the Booth property line, they parked off the gravel shoulder, tires crunching slow. Fog gathered low like smoke hugging the dirt. Ray popped the glove box and pulled out a pair of mini binoculars, half broken. Dale slung the flashlight low, not turning it on yet. The silence wrapped around them like a coat too tight. What they didn't know was that something already knew they were there. Back near the creek bed, deep behind the ridge, the young one had been moving for nearly an hour. It had watched them come, noticed the change in the wind, heard the cough of the pickup 2 ridges over. It moved quiet, always upright, with the caution of something both hunted and aware. It dragged a dead branch through the wet soil, marking a new trail, faint enough to trick the careless, just enough to look real under weak light. Then it stepped sideways, deeper into the brush, and vanished. Ray and Dale caught the path within minutes. "See that?" Dale whispered, flashing the beam across snapped twigs and a flattened stretch of moss. "Game trail. He's been moving through here, no doubt." Ray raised the camcorder, the red record light blinking against the trees. They followed the fake trail, zigzagging through brush that seemed too clean, too intentional, but they were too excited to notice. The deeper they walked, the less their voices carried. The air grew heavier. The light struggled against the fog. At the edge of a sunken ravine, the trail disappeared. "Where the hell?" Ray muttered, turning full circle. The flashlight swung wide and caught the lip of wet stone. One step more and Dale would have dropped in. "Careful," Ray said. "I ain't blind," Dale snapped. They argued in hushed tones, voices sharp but low. No way to climb down without slipping, no way forward. Back at the tree line, the young one crouched behind a cluster of rock and watched. It didn't blink. They turned back, annoyed and cold, but not empty-handed. As they walked, Ray lifted the camcorder and paused near a tree where the fog parted just enough. For a second, a single heartbeat, his lens caught movement in the frame, a shoulder, broad, covered in something dark and wet. Just the curve of it, and half of a head, barely a blur, then gone. Ray froze. "Rewound the tape right there, pressed play." "There," he whispered. They watched again, barely 2 seconds, but enough to stir up something. Not proof, not really, but just enough to ignite a story. They didn't speak much on the way back. The road out seemed longer, and the woods didn't feel quite as empty. Not long after, Harlan saw the flicker of headlights through the trees. He was standing in the darkened kitchen, sipping weak coffee, the lamp off. He didn't panic, just waited. Watched the beams drift and stop, then turn. He moved through the house slow, locked the back door, set the bolt, checked the front latch. The girl was still asleep, breathing steadier now. He stepped outside once more, just past midnight, the lantern in hand but not lit. The porch creaked beneath his weight. Nothing moved, but near the edge of the barn something caught his eye. Mud, a wide smear across the side of his pickup's rear wheel. Fresh. He knelt down, fingers brushing the tread. He hadn't driven since the rain. No visitors, no delivery men. Someone had stood close. Close enough to touch. He looked toward the trees. Nothing stirred, no rustling, no glow of eyes. But he felt it again, that line in the soil between watcher and watched. The old boundary shifting. Inside, the girl let out a faint moan. He turned, stepped back inside, bolted the door behind him. Later, as he sat in the rocker and stared into the stove's glow, he thought about the camcorder, how they always wanted proof. Something to hold, something to parade, but they didn't understand. Some things weren't meant to be trapped in a frame. Some things saw the lens long before the lens saw them, and they remembered who tried to take. The house creaked, a log split in the fire, and in the darkness beyond the window, the woods held its breath again, waiting, listening, marking who stepped too far into the wrong silence. The bell above the drugstore door gave a soft jingle that didn't match the weight in Harlan Booth's chest. He stepped in slow, coat damp from the mist, and sleeves rolled halfway up, trying to look like a man on a simple errand. The place hadn't changed in years. The same glass counter with ointments lined up like soldiers, the same cracked linoleum, the same faded calendar behind the register that still said February, though it was late March now. A small space, too quiet for secrets, but small towns were good at making silence stretch around questions. Behind the counter, Mrs. Whitlow looked up from her crossword and gave him a once-over with those sharp brown eyes of hers. "You're a sight," she muttered, standing up slow. He nodded without a word, tugged a folded list from his coat pocket and laid it down on the glass. Salt packets, electrolyte mix, 2 bottles of amoxicillin, fever reducer, gauze. Nothing that screamed emergency, but just enough to raise a brow if someone looked too close. She skimmed the list and gave him that half-suspicious squint she'd worn since her husband died 5 winters back. "You expecting a bug to run through the whole farm?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Just trying to be ahead of things this time." She didn't press. Just turned and started gathering what she could from the back shelves. The soft crinkle of paper bags and the faint hiss of the receipt printer filled the space. Out front, the street was quiet. One pickup truck idled outside the diner across the way. A kid on a BMX bike popped a wheelie near the feed store, then rode off without looking back. Harlan tapped a few fingers against the counter. The bell above the door jingled again. He didn't turn, but he knew that voice. "Well, I'll be damned if it ain't Harlan Booth crawled out from the mountain." He turned slowly to find Dale leaning against the door frame, arms crossed, his cap tilted back just enough to show off the pink line of an old scar above his eyebrow. His smile was all teeth. "Didn't figure you for town business this time of day," Dale said, glancing at the bag being filled behind the counter. "What's the trouble? Mule catch a cold?" Harlan kept his voice even. "Just stocking up." Dale grinned wider, then looked past him to the rear tire of Harlan's truck parked outside. His eyes paused there a beat too long. "That your Ford?" he asked. Harlan nodded once. "Funny. Thought I saw a streak of fresh mud along the back quarter last night. Same shade as the creek beds out by your side." Harlan said nothing. Mrs. Whitlow handed over the bag and the receipt. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked between the two men like she'd heard every word that hadn't been spoken yet. "Cash or check, Mr. Booth?" "Cash." He pulled out a crumpled envelope from his coat, counted out the bills slow, placed them flat on the counter. As he turned to go, Dale stepped slightly aside, not blocking the door exactly, but not clearing the path either. "Be careful out there," Dale said, voice low. "A lot of folks say strange things been moving in them woods. You see anything, you let us know." "I see a lot of things," Harlan replied without looking back. "Most of 'em ain't yours to chase." He pushed the door open, bell jingling once again. On the road back, the forest closed in fast. He took the long way, past the old logging bridge where the boards always creaked like ribs under weight. When he slowed near the curve, he felt it before he saw it. Movement in the trees to his right. He pulled over, engine idling. Through the shifting mist, just beyond the first row of pines, a figure moved parallel to the truck. Not rushing, not hiding. The juvenile. It walked in step with him for 30 yards, keeping distance, watching the paper bag in his passenger seat. When the truck stopped, it stopped too. Eyes locked across that narrow band of trees, both of them quiet in their separate worlds. Harlan reached over and tapped the bag gently, held it up once, then set it back down. The creature blinked. Just once. Then gave a slight nod, not with its head, but with its whole posture, a shift in the shoulders, the angle of its arms. Then it stepped back into the brush and was gone. When he got back to the cabin, the sun was nothing but a pale smear behind the clouds. He parked close, walked slow. The back door was shut, but not latched. That stopped him cold. He never left it unlatched. He stepped inside, careful not to jostle the bag. Everything looked the same at first. The stove was cold. The girl still lay curled on the cot, breathing shallow but steady. Then he noticed the edge of the kitchen table. The bottle of fever reducer had been moved, just slightly off-center. He checked the counter. One of the drawers had been nudged open, no sign of forced entry, no smashed windows. He ran his finger along the doorknob. A smudge. Faint, brownish. Could have been mud. Could have been something else. Someone had come inside, but nothing was taken. Not the wallet in the coat pocket hanging by the door. Not the tools in the shed. Not even the old pistol in the drawer by the sink. Just the medicine cabinet. He glanced back at the cot. The girl hadn't stirred. Still too weak. Still deep in that strange sleep where fever dreams twist around memory. He walked to the dresser and looked down at the leather strap. Still there, still folded just so. He took a breath. Slow, deep. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, The idea that someone had entered the house to steal, or the quiet suggestion that someone had entered to check. That night, as he sat by the window with the oil lamp turned low and the bag of medicine still folded tight in his hand, he heard the sound of an engine. Not close, but not far either. Out on the ridge road, a motorcycle roared past, its tires kicking up a ribbon of gravel dust before fading into the dark. No one rode this far up at night. Not unless they had reason. He didn't sleep again. Just waited, lantern burning low, eyes on the edge of the woods, heart beating not with fear, but with the knowledge that the quiet had started to thin, and there were more footsteps on the way. Under a leaden sky that hadn't broken in days, the wind carried the smell of wet pine and the faint bitter curl of cigarette smoke that didn't belong. Harlan Booth stood behind the barn, one hand resting on the rusted pump handle, the other bracing against his lower back as the old machine coughed and sputtered like it always did when he needed it to be loud. The rattle of it echoed off the hills, masking other sounds. He wasn't pumping water. Not today. He was buying time, out near the fence line, where the frost had started to lift but the earth stayed soft. Something low moved with impossible quiet. A heavy shape hugging the contours of the land, back curved like a shadow wearing muscle. The juvenile crept beneath the lean of an old cattle panel, bare arms brushing cedar as it slinked forward. Its chest rose slow, not from panic, but calculation. Eyes fixed on the glint of wire. There were two traps. One had been hidden beneath leaves and scattered feed. The other tucked just outside the mule's pen, covered in horsehair and mud. Crude, but cruel. Snares made for something big. Not a rabbit, not even a coyote. This was meant to cinch tight around legs that stood tall. The creature reached the first trap, massive hands moving with an almost delicate grace. It bent, fingers pulling at the tension in the cord, reading the mechanism like it had seen this dance before. One tug, a shift, a slow release. The noose sagged open, limp and harmless. The trap was disarmed, but it didn't relax. The other one waited still. Inside the house, Nell stirred beneath the blanket, her skin still pale, but the fever was breaking. The worst of the sweat had passed, though her voice hadn't fully returned. Her breath made a quiet rasp as she turned on her side. Her thin arm reached toward the sound outside, the clanking of the pump, the deep hum of a world trying to protect itself from what it couldn't name. She sat up slowly, barefoot, the edge of the blanket falling from her knees. She didn't call out, just listened, then stood. Her small frame moved through the hallway toward the back door. Harlan saw her through the window as he shut the pump down. He froze. One hand lifted slightly, palm up, not in panic, but in a silent ask. Don't come out. She reached the threshold anyway, bare feet pausing at the edge of the wood floor. Her eyes found his. She looked smaller there, backlit by the soft flicker of the oil lamp inside, hair sticking in loose strands, mouth parted like she wanted to say something but hadn't yet decided which words were worth using. Then came the crunch of a boot step, heavy, offbeat. Harlan's face shifted. He turned slowly toward the tree line. There, not far from where the trap had been, a man stood with a flashlight aimed low. Ray, alone this time, but alert. His shoulders moved like he was trying to act casual, but the beam of his light swept too quickly, too nervously, cutting across the barn wall, catching the corner of a feed bucket, then sliding toward the porch. Harlan moved toward the girl, shielding her from view without making it obvious. He stood in front of the open door as Ray called out, "Evening, Harlan. Thought I'd check in. Heard some rustling last night over this way." Ray's voice was too chipper, too open. Harlan didn't smile. "Nothing here but raccoons and wind," he said, the lie smooth. Ray stepped closer to the edge of the fence. Not over it. Not yet. But close enough to smell the feed. Close enough to see the fresh disturbance in the soil where one of the traps had been disarmed. "That's so?" Ray asked, eyes narrowing. He lifted the flashlight again, beam sweeping wide. For a second, It touched on something small, soft fabric, barely visible through the slatted chair on the porch. A child's coat, pink, damp from where it had been draped and forgotten. Ray paused. His smile didn't return. "A funny thing," he said, stepping back. "I could have sworn I saw tracks near the old trail behind your place. Big ones. Thought I'd follow them down to the ravine, but they disappeared. Just gone." Harlan said nothing. Behind him, Nell leaned into the door frame, heart ticking like a loose gear. She saw the flashlight pass over her coat, saw Ray's eyes fix on it. Her breath hitched. For a second, she started forward, but Harlan held up his hand again, just slightly, still turned toward the man outside. "I'll let you know if I see anything," Harlan said, voice flat. Ray looked at him a moment longer, like he was searching the lines on Harlan's face for permission or weakness or some old truth that hadn't been spoken. Then he shrugged. "Well, you take care. Never know what kind of strays wander up in weather like this." His boots crunched as he turned. The beam clicked off, and he was gone. For a long time, Harlan didn't move. Then he exhaled, stepped aside, let Nell come forward. She wrapped her arms around herself, looked down at the porch slats, at the jacket. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes not meeting his. "I left it out. I didn't think—" He crouched beside her, lifted the coat, shook off the moisture, folded it tight. "We'll be more careful next time," he said gently. But her shoulders didn't relax. Her hands clutched the edge of the blanket now draped over her like it might fly off without warning. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble," she said. "You didn't." She nodded, but didn't believe it. Inside, she sat near the stove, legs pulled up under her. She watched the flame flicker through the vent grate. Harlan walked to the dresser, fingers brushing the leather strap again, the same way he had every night. Reassurance, memory, promise. The wind picked up outside. The last of the pump water dripped from the spigot into the rust basin, each drop louder in the quiet. Then something shifted in the woods. Not the juvenile, something bigger, farther back, watching. It didn't come forward, didn't move through the fence line. It only stood there, behind the tree line, tall, still, framed by the edges of darkness like a sentinel carved from the timber itself. Harlan saw it through the window. A shape more than a form. No glow, no movement, just presence. It didn't step closer, but it didn't leave either. He walked to the door and turned the knob slow, opened it halfway. The wind gusted, but the figure didn't shift. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, eyes locked across the distance, not blinking. Then he nodded once. Not out of fear, not out of challenge, just acknowledgement. The figure faded back into the forest. A breath held too long, a question not asked. The air around the cabin tightened, and somewhere far off, down the same ridge Ray had walked earlier, a sound rippled once. A chain dragged across gravel. Another trap. Another move. This time, they weren't guessing. This time, someone meant to catch what they couldn't understand. But the land had eyes, and not all of them belonged to men. The storm didn't break that night, but it threatened to. Clouds stacked low like a herd circling for hours above the Ouachita ridges, full of something that hadn't quite decided whether to fall. The air was thick with pine resin and wet stone. Harlan Booth sat on the edge of the porch, lantern dim behind him, the girl's breathing steady from inside. He had one hand resting on his knee, the other wrapped around a cup of bitter coffee that had long gone cold. The dogs in the valley hadn't barked for hours. Then suddenly, one did. Sharp, clipped, then silence again. It didn't take a genius to feel something moving. He stood slowly, set the mug down without a sound, and walked across the packed earth toward the tool shed. No boots on, just socks dampening through from the ground. He knew better than to bring too much noise with him now. From the edge of the tree line, the timber seemed to hold its breath, but the air carried something metallic. Not blood, not smoke, just tension. Farther down the ridge, where the old switchback trail curved along the limestone bluff, Someone else was moving. 2 someones, maybe 3. They weren't shouting. That was the worst part. No drunken rambling, no cowboy whooping, just quiet crunches of boots that knew where to step, but couldn't hide the weight of a plan. They had come with purpose this time. No VHS cameras, no curiosity, just intention. Ray was among them. But it wasn't his call. It was Dale's now, and his voice was quieter than usual, more clipped. "We get something tonight. We don't show it around. We don't run our mouths. We just see what's true." The third man, someone younger, someone from across the river in Hodgen who nobody knew well, carried a thermal scope and a borrowed .30-06. He didn't say much either. The 3 moved in a staggered triangle across the side path where old cattle fencing had rusted down to nailheads and memory. They kept their lights low and their hands ready. The forest didn't resist them. It waited, and above them, in the height of the cedar canopy, something else moved, without breaking a branch, without making a sound. The elder had been watching since the first boot hit the gravel road 2 miles back. It had circled ahead, chosen its place. Tall, broad, still. It didn't need to chase them. It only needed to let them come close enough to see what it wanted them to fear. Back on the Booth property, the pump hadn't been turned on all day. No water drawn. No noise made. Nell sat cross-legged near the stove, small hands wrapped around a cup of warm broth. She hadn't spoken much since the night before, when the porch light caught Ray's flashlight slipping across the buttons of her jacket. She knew she had made a mistake. Not the kind you fix, the kind you carry. The juvenile hadn't been seen all afternoon, but Harlan knew it was near. Probably farther up near the gorge, maybe watching, maybe waiting for something it couldn't quite name. The traps had been moved. They always were. But it was the silence tonight that felt different. Harlan looked at the kerosene lamp burning low beside the window and walked to the back room. From the top drawer, he pulled a tin box. No key, just a clip lid. Inside, he found the length of gauze, the small scissors, the clean roll of tape, and a half-used sling from a time long gone. He didn't know if he'd need it tonight, but he'd rather be ready. He walked back toward the girl and sat across from her, both of them close enough to hear the pine logs shift inside the stove. "Do you know how to listen without panic?" he asked, voice low. She blinked once, then nodded. "Good," he said. "You may need that soon." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. 3 hills over, Ray slipped on a slick patch of moss and caught himself with one hand, breathing hard. Dale turned, hissed something about keeping steady. They were near the boulder field now, where the moonlight barely made it through. The third man, the one with the rifle, was already stepping too fast, already too far ahead. His breath steamed in the cold. His scope flickered once. Then a sound came, not loud, not violent, just a slow, deliberate scrape of heel against rock. Too heavy for a deer, too smooth for a bear. Ray froze. Something crossed the clearing 30 feet ahead. Not running, just crossing. Big, upright. The third man raised the rifle. "No," Dale said, grabbing his sleeve. "Wait." The barrel wavered, but it didn't drop. Then the air shifted. Not the wind, the weight of the air, like being under a storm that hadn't hit yet. That's when the elder stepped out. Not rushed, not snarling, just visible, just enough. Its frame filled the right side of the clearing. Shoulders like stacked cordwood. Legs rooted like trunks. Fur wet from mist and time. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply made itself seen. The younger man dropped the rifle. Ray backed away 3 steps and fell hard, his flashlight spinning. Dale stood still, eyes wide, jaw set tight. Then the elder turned its head, slowly, like a teacher correcting posture. A pause. 1 step forward. They broke. The group scattered back toward the trail, breathing like animals caught mid-hunt. Dale tripped on the wet stone, his ankles sliding out from under him with a crack that echoed off the ridge. The shout that came wasn't meant for anyone. It just ripped out of him. The others kept running. Harlan heard the sound from the porch and didn't flinch. Nell turned her head toward the hills. She recognized fear now, even from a distance. Then something moved near the woodshed. Not big. The juvenile. Covered in grit, arms scraped, eyes wide with something more than instinct. It looked at Harlan, then at Nell, then toward the hills. He understood. He nodded once. The juvenile stepped into the darkness again. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then, from the tree line near the property, came a dragging sound. Not feet, something being pulled. And then Dale stumbled out of the brush, one arm dangling uselessly, his shirt soaked from shoulder to hip, not with blood, but with sweat and mud and shame. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow, and right behind him, nothing, not a shadow, not a sound, only the cold silence of a man who had seen what no one would believe. Harlan stepped forward, said nothing, helped him to the porch. No judgment in his touch, just hands that knew how to bind. Ray and the other didn't return that night, maybe ever. When Dale woke the next morning in the barn's side cot, blinking at the dust floating in sunbeams, the first thing he asked wasn't where he was. It was, "Is she safe?" And Harlan only nodded. Later, when the man left with his arm bound and his heart quiet, he didn't take the path back through the woods. He walked the long road, the quiet road, and never looked back. That night, when the moon climbed clear above the pines and Nell sat outside with her knees tucked up, the juvenile returned. It didn't come all the way to the porch. It just placed something at the edge of the grass, a VHS tape, wrapped in cloth, left like a secret given back. She stepped down, picked it up, turned it in her hands, and when she looked back, the creature was already gone. Not hiding, just leaving space. Some truths didn't need to be recorded. Some truths needed to be protected. And when Harlan stepped out and saw her holding the bundle, he didn't ask where it came from. He only said, "That's good." Then he turned off the porch light and let the dark come in without fear. The morning broke gray and undecided, like the sky couldn't quite figure out if it wanted to let go of the rain or hold it back another day. Harlan sat in the corner of the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, the other holding a stack of forms printed the old way, clunky typeface, carbon copies pressed into the page. His signature looked out of place, too careful, like he was writing it for someone else. Across the table sat Pastor Eldridge from the tiny chapel off Parker's Hollow. Old man with a neat shirt and quiet voice, the kind that didn't need sermons to carry weight. He'd offered the paper without question, just a brief glance at Nell sleeping on the cot and a nod, like the whole thing made sense. No state troopers, no child services, just trust, in the form of a legal, temporary guardianship agreement. Dated, witnessed, church-backed, enough to buy time, enough to keep certain men from asking questions with badges instead of flashlights. Harlan set the pen down. It clicked once on the table, louder than expected. The pastor smiled faintly, folded the papers, and said, "If anyone asks, she's kin from your late wife's side. They won't press past that." Then he touched his hat, walked back to the rusted truck, and left without another word. Nell woke an hour later, sat up slow, rubbed her eyes. When Harlan handed her the toast, she stared at it like it was more than food, like it was a vote of confidence she didn't feel she deserved. That afternoon, the juvenile came back, not close, not past the fence. But he stood beneath the oak ridge, hands empty, just breathing. Harlan saw him first, nudged Nell with a glance. She didn't speak, just stepped barefoot into the damp grass, flannel sleeves rolled up, arms crossed against the chill. The creature didn't move, but at his feet was something, deliberately placed, not dropped. A bundle of yellowed grass, shredded and cleaned, tightly wound, meant for bedding, meant for a colt. She stepped forward once, then again, then crouched just far enough to reach for the bundle without breaking the distance. Their eyes met. He didn't blink. She didn't run. When she stood, she held it like it mattered, like she understood. Not a gift, a gesture. The juvenile stepped back into the woods, That night she helped muck the stalls. It wasn't graceful. She spilled half the oats on the wrong side of the trough and nearly dropped the feed bucket trying to swing the gate open. But she kept moving, kept watching Harlan's hands, copying each motion like the rhythm of the place was beginning to stitch into her bones. By the time the sun dropped below the back ridge, she had learned how to measure out water, how to wipe the mud from the mule's hooves without spooking her, how to use both hands to shovel straw in an even layer instead of clumps. When the stars came, Harlan handed her the tin of electrolyte mix. She mixed it herself, careful with the ratios, stirred it slow, carried it back to the house with both hands. In the corner of the kitchen, the fire cracked in the iron stove. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Later, as the shadows gathered thick near the timberline, the girl stepped onto the porch to check the bundle of grass still resting there. Harlan followed with a blanket and set it around her shoulders. Neither of them said what they were thinking. The sound of tires came hours later. Gravel. Slow. Too slow to be a passerby. Harlan knew that engine before the lights even broke the trees. Dale. But this time, he wasn't drunk. Wasn't loud. He stepped out of the truck and pulled something from the bed. Not a camera. A trap. Big. Steel jaws rusted at the hinge, but still sharp enough to kill. Harlan didn't move from the porch. He watched as Dale knelt near the edge of the woods. Didn't try to hide what he was doing. Didn't make a show of it either. Just unrolled the chain, pressed the plate into the soil, and set the trigger. Then he covered it with leaves and backed away. The man looked up. Their eyes met. Dale didn't say a word. He got in the truck and drove off. It was a quiet kind of war, one that didn't need declarations. Back inside, Nell sat at the kitchen table, holding the folded document the pastor had left behind. Her name written in black ink at the top. Her birthday, still a guess. Her place of origin, left blank. She ran her finger over the words and asked, "Why'd you do it?" Harlan didn't answer right away. He poured water into the kettle. Lit the stove. "Because no one did it for my boy. Because silence didn't save him. Because if I don't keep you here, someone else will take you apart piece by piece in the name of protecting you." But what he said felt like the right thing. She didn't nod, didn't thank him, just looked down and whispered, "I hid the tape. It's safe. I didn't want them to use it." He looked at her a long time, not angry, not relieved, just tired. But something in his eyes softened. "You did right." She didn't smile, but she breathed easier. Later, when the lamps were off and the moon hung pale behind the clouds, a shape moved along the back fence. Harlan saw it from the window. Not the juvenile. Taller. Heavier. The elder. It stood for a long time near the cedar line, eyes glinting faintly, head low. He stepped outside without a coat, walked to the edge of the yard, arms loose at his sides. They looked at each other across the dark. Not enemies. Not friends. Something older than that. The elder bent slightly at the knees. A slow motion. A nod. Then it disappeared into the trees. The wind picked up. A branch creaked. Inside the barn, Nell had left the shredded grass on the floor of the mule stall. Not carelessly, like it belonged there. Harlan stepped into the hayloft, stared at the roof where the storm hadn't yet come, and listened to the stillness like it meant something. When he came back down, he passed the girl's room. She was asleep on the cot, curled on her side, one hand resting near the paper the pastor had signed. He looked down at her for a while, then reached to pull the blanket higher around her shoulders. His fingers brushed her hand. She didn't stir. But in the dark, a word came from his lips that hadn't left in decades. Family. He didn't flinch when he said it. And it didn't feel foreign anymore. Outside, somewhere not far, a twig cracked under weight. Something still watched, but not with hunger, with caution, respect, and a growing sense that the lines had moved again, a shift in the border. Not marked with fences, but with choices. And soon, someone else would cross it. The sun had bled out low across the sky, leaving behind nothing but a long, angry stripe of fire over the western ridge. It wasn't the soft kind of dusk that settles easy. This one scraped. Dust curled off the road like smoke behind the rear wheels of Harlan's pickup. the old Ford humming low through the last bend before the timber line. He'd meant to check the south fence. That was the excuse. But the truth was gnawing in his chest before he even cut the engine. He left the truck idling at the edge of the hill, stepped out slow. The evening light threw long shadows over the gravel, painting everything in reds and rusts. Something about the air felt sharp, like a page had turned, and whatever came next wouldn't wait for permission. He found the trap within minutes. It was placed with care, not recklessness. A steel jaw, rust-blistered but deadly, tucked beneath a shallow mound of brush along the lower deer trail. Chain wrapped tight around a root. Trigger just visible if you knew what you were looking for. And near it, too near, a cedar branch had been broken at thigh height. He crouched, jaw tight, and ran a hand over the ground around it. There, pressed into the clay, were boot tracks. Not his. Wide heel, heavy set. They stopped right at the bait. His pulse climbed. He followed the drag marks upslope, just enough to see it. A man had set this thing for something large and recent. Harlan glanced to the tree line. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. The forest was listening. He squatted next to the trap and slid a flat piece of cedar into the joint, pressing into the hinge. He'd taught the juvenile how to wedge steel open with dry wood weeks ago. Tonight, the lesson returned. He locked the cedar tight between the teeth, bracing the frame so if it snapped, it wouldn't break bone. Just bruise, just scare, and then he waited. The first rustle came from uphill, a quiet shift of weight. Then the footfall. Dale stepped from behind the split oak, dragging a long stick to steady himself, one boot caked with drying mud. His eyes darted once at the trap, then at Harlan. He said nothing. Harlan rose. "You plan to catch it?" he asked. Dale's jaw clenched, throat working like he was chewing the question before speaking it. "Plan to prove it, once and for all." Harlan shook his head, stepped between Dale and the steel mouth in the dirt. "What then?" Harlan said, voice low. "You drag it out in daylight, parade it through town, sell it to some channel on cable. You don't know what it's like," Dale muttered. "Living in the same place all your life and being laughed at for what you saw." "I know more than you think," Harlan replied. But Dale had already stepped forward, one boot crunching the edge of the trail. And that was all it took. The weight shift, the forgotten spot. His heel came down on the trigger. There was a loud snap, like bone cracking, but the jaws stopped just short, jammed tight around the cedar wedge. Dale screamed, buckled, collapsed sideways into the dirt. The trap held, didn't close, but the force had been enough to knock him flat. Harlan knelt fast, hands moving steady. He didn't ask if Dale could move his toes. He didn't yell or curse or throw blame. He just unwound the chain, pulled the hinge pin, and pried the jaws apart one by one until Dale's leg was free. The man hissed through his teeth, white in the face. "I wasn't going to kill it," he said between shallow breaths. "But you were willing to risk it," Harlan answered. He took the old bandage roll from his pocket and began to wrap, slow and firm. "You'd do the same for a bear, wouldn't you?" Dale said weakly. "Trap it if it came too close." "It's not a bear," Harlan whispered. By the time he finished binding the leg, the wind had changed, and they weren't alone. From the dark tree line, a low presence pressed forward. Heavy footsteps, no charge, no warning growl. Just that impossible weight, the kind you feel in your chest before your ears catch it. And then it stepped through the cedar gloom, backlit by the last burnt streak of sun. The juvenile was still, but behind him, just outside the curve of moonlight, the elder emerged, broad shoulders hunched, arms heavy, fur damp from the long night, face quiet, watching. Dale's breath caught. He reached for Harlan's arm, but no one moved. The elder stared at them, not like a predator, not like a guardian, like a judge. And then it stepped forward. Harlan rose, slow, his hands out. "I fixed the trap," he said. "We stopped it from taking flesh." The elder blinked, tilted its head once, and then, without sound, it turned away. The juvenile didn't follow. Not yet. He looked at Dale. at the wrapped leg, at the silver gleam of the trap, now disarmed and harmless. Then, like a breath that had been held too long, he stepped back into the woods, and they were gone. No howl, no growl, no vengeance, just withdrawal. That night Dale didn't say much on the ride back. Harlan helped him into the truck bed, let him lie down beneath an old tarp. When he stopped outside town, Dale pulled himself upright and looked toward the ridge. He didn't speak, just nodded once, a quiet kind of surrender. "I won't come back," he said. And Harlan believed him. By week's end, the papers were filed. The guardianship became official. Nell's name inked again, this time in thicker strokes. The preacher came by once more, brought a basket of canned pears and a thermos of soup, left without lingering. Harlan added a second stall to the barn, not for livestock, for learning. Nell took to the work fast. Her hands found the rhythm of hay and hammer. She laughed once, only once, when she hammered her thumb and didn't cry. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch, Harlan, Nell, and the quiet space where memory lived. The lamp burned low, the coffee steamed, and in the dark, at the edge of the tree line, a shape moved again, not threatening, not waiting. It stepped just far enough into view to be seen, and then it knelt, a branch in hand, bristling with fresh-picked grass, tied neat, left like a message. And when they woke the next morning, the porch was empty. But beside the steps, resting atop the stone where Harlan once left smoked fish long ago, was another gift. The same type of grass, arranged with care. Beside it, a small circle of stones, carefully placed. 3 knocks on the railing followed the wind. Not loud, but clear. Not goodbye. Not this time. Just a reminder. We're still here, and so are you. Sometimes the world speaks in thunder, sometimes in silence, and sometimes in the hush between them. There's a presence watching, listening, waiting for the moment when someone finally chooses kindness over fear. This story was never about the wilderness. Not really. It was about what people do when the world grows quiet enough to hear the truth of themselves. About what happens when someone, without glory, without witnesses, reaches out across the great divide, not to conquer, but to care. There's a kind of courage that doesn't shout, a kind that looks like folding an extra blanket, setting out food without asking for thanks, standing guard not with fists, but with patience. It's the kind of courage that changes things, quietly, permanently. There are places deep in the hills where no road goes, where the land remembers more than we do, where stories don't end, they echo. In those places, the line between wild and human softens, not in weakness, but in understanding. Maybe the point was never to prove what's real, but to learn what's right. Not to hunt what's hidden, but to protect what trusts you enough to show itself. And maybe, just maybe, home isn't made of walls, but of promises kept without witnesses, of glances held without words, of a life lived in a way that says, "You're safe here." Maybe family isn't who we're born to, but who we choose to shelter. And maybe the ones we shelter end up sheltering us too, in ways we don't see until long after. So if you're still listening out there, wherever you are, this story wasn't told to frighten you. It wasn't told to convince you of anything. It was told to remind you that even in the darkest woods, there's a path made from quiet choices. And sometimes, the smallest gesture, a hand extended, a burden carried, a silence respected, is enough to change a life. Or save one. Because in the end, what matters isn't what we prove to the world. It's what we choose to protect when no one's looking. Thank you for sharing this time with us tonight. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred a memory, or sparked a question, or made you feel just a little less alone, consider leaving a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to be here when the next story comes down the line, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It helps us more than you know, and it keeps the fire burning just a little longer. Until next time, stay warm, stay kind, and keep listening. The forest is never as far away as it seems.